I'm Kathryn Flashner, and this is The Truth Is, a podcast about discovering what it means to live your truth. Even when it's messy, when it unravels the plans you thought you had and invites you to step into the unknown. Each week, we explore practices, stories, and conversations that illuminate the ways we find and follow our own path. This is a space to slow down, ask questions, and uncover what's been quietly waiting inside of you. If it resonates, subscribing, following, and engaging with the show really supports me in bringing more people into the conversation. Thank you for being here. Welcome to The Truth Is. Hi, guys. Welcome to The Truth Is. I'm Kathryn, and I'm here with you all by myself this week. And I have to say, I really like the space to pause and to really take in and integrate all that I have taken from the last month of conversations. And I'll talk a little bit more in this solo episode why that inclination feels like such an exhale. But it has been such a rich and meaningful month on the podcast. I started the month with Esosa Osa, the founder and CEO of Onyx Impact. We explored her journey of leading an organization that is focused on understanding misinformation and understanding reality, the reality of living in the age of misinformation that is being accelerated by AI for specifically Black communities, in the way that she has deliberately created content and created technology designed with their empowerment in mind. And then we talked to Asma Khan, who was like vision board status for me to be able to sit down with, about her journey to creating one of the only all-female kitchens at the caliber of restaurant that she operates in the world, and the reality of that journey. And I think the most poignant thing that I keep thinking about that ties both to Asma's story and Esosa's is Asma says, people always say you can't be what you can't see. But I didn't see anything like what I wanted to be, but I believed in it and I stepped towards it and I created it. And now she gets to be something for other women to see. And same with Esosa, the creation of an AI rooted in Black history, Black joy, Black culture did not exist in the world. And I find that through my conversations. You know, I'm 25 episodes in to exploring what truth feels like in the arc of someone's life, how they discover it for themselves. And it's naturally brought us to the contemplation of this moment, which is for me, how we feel into who we truly are and actually stand for that and, quite frankly, defend it. And I think we're moving into these big questions with the acceleration of AI on what it means to be human and how we value the components of what it means to be human and stand for that. So more on that in a few minutes, and you'll get a big peek behind the curtain of what's been going on in my brain and, the truth of my experience over the last several weeks. After Asma, I got to sit down with Franziska Gonder, who is a global somatic leadership coach based in Portugal, originally from Germany, but spent many formative years in the US before moving her family back to Europe and settling in a beautiful life in Portugal. She works with leaders across many different sectors, how in understanding somatic intelligence, I think is the right way to say it. And what I've come to understand, it's the intelligence of our body beyond our brains. It's been a thread in many of my conversations that in understanding ourselves, in understanding our lives, in processing our lives, I think back to my conversation with Cindy Sharkey. She referenced this idea that we kind of are conditioned to think that we're a brain with a body, but it's all the more opening to consider that we're a body with our brain, and our body is always communicating to us. I know that in my life, and it's reflected back to me
in my conversations again and again. What Franziska talks about, not only her own journey, but what she's come to really understand in the presence of teams and organizations. It's some of like the most industry leading companies, is that like the nervous system of a leader, of an individual in a team, in a room, affects the experience of everyone. It put into words the experiences that I reckoned with throughout my years in the corporate world, and definitely validated why some of the hardest moments I had in those chapters were so hard on my whole being, on my whole body. And those lessons carry through to today. It's not just a statement about being in an organization, whether it's corporate or not, being in teams. I'm learning these lessons in real time, and I want to talk to you a little bit about them in this episode. And then I will say, meeting with Stacey Lindsay, journalist, author of the upcoming book, Being 40, it really felt like sitting down with a big sister that was like, everything is going to be okay. Stacey has built a career as a journalist on like getting people to tell her their truth in some like very vulnerable situations. And upon entering the decade of her 40s, she felt this gap of like, wait, we're not talking enough, and we're not talking honestly enough about what this decade tends to reveal. And that sent her on this like deeply personal, and what I see as like this journalistic mission of interviewing an incredible roster of women that have all followed their own little thread of personal and collective truth telling. One little wink of synchronicity that came to me after that interview, it was so funny. One of the women she interviews in this book, his name is Valerie Rain. She's a PhD that has built this body of work called patriarchy stress disorder. We hear these concepts in modern culture, modern media so frequently. We know they affect us. Rarely do we really interrogate them deeply. And this PhD that she interviewed is someone that has really interrogated like both the historical, the psychological, and the present day impact of patriarchal systems and ways of thinking and living. And it was so funny. A few days after I interviewed Stacey, I was walking through my neighborhood, which is like adorned with free little libraries. I am such a stan for free little libraries. And this is a random detail, but I was listening to an interview with the 20-year-old called Clavicular while walking, which I wrote an essay on Substack about if you're curious about my rumination on that topic. But just a funny thing to be listening to as I walked by this free little library and I looked in it, and the book that was staring right back to me was the aforementioned PhD's book called Patriarchy Stress Disorder. So I often say, I find on this podcast that I'm like pulling this thread of brilliant individuals, many brilliant women as of late. And it's been such a meaningful, unexpected component of this journey of like one conversation leading to another, leading to another, leading to another. And what I want to move into reflecting on, and I think that's a nice segue, is that I am 1 year into this transition for myself. And one of the things that is so important to me, both through what I'm building now and as I reflect on my own journey and experience, is like to normalize the in-between, to normalize the muck of being alive, of being human, of trying to figure it out. And so what I want to say first is that I knew that something needed to change. I did not know what that next chapter was going to look like. I didn't know the answer, is maybe said better. I knew that I could no longer operate the way I was operating. I was incredibly burned out. I was feeling like a shell of myself. And it's important to say I had women in my life that I worked with and for that supported me in this decision. So it's funny that I came up on a year this week. It was a year ago that I got on a plane and flew to Copenhagen and to meet up with some dear friends and jumped in Nordic water. And I was like, whoa, I don't have a job. There's so much to explore in that journey. And, I hope that it meets someone as a little squeeze on the shoulder to say, if you're in any reevaluation and any transition, like, you are so not alone. There's realities about this type of career transition that I want to give more space to. I think naming a few facts up front is just really important because we are so often marketed like the after picture. And I found that I was like really susceptible to that over the last year, the like manifested life in the abundance. And we don't talk enough about nuance and context. And so, look, I'm a single woman in my mid 30s. I have to make real decisions about what my runway is, what my financial reality looks like. I think it's important to name up front that I had worked in the corporate world for 10 years. And so while I didn't have an abundant financial picture, I had savings that I intentionally planned to give me the runway for what I'm doing now. And I'm coming up on a period where it's taking some really deliberate planning to figure out what the next few months and 6 months looks like. So there's just some contextual ground rules that I just think are so important before I offer like any sort of lesson or nugget that could be supportive to you. But as I come up on a year of this thing, I've been thinking about a couple of like the big lessons that I have been humbled by. And I wanted to talk through a few of them with you today. Many people that I'm close to will hear me over and over again say something like, it is so annoying to learn this the hard way. I say to people a lot, I feel like I should have a newsletter called Obvious Conclusions, because it is like I'm learning the things that I was always told or assumed were reality and were a part of this. And then like, I don't know, this journey has just showed me that sometimes you have to live through and learn things for yourself. When I first left my last job to come back to this type of work, I left April 1st and I was like, all right, you're going to have it launched and ready to go May 15th. And I launched in September. Like, that was just not reality. I had to grow into a deep appreciation for what it actually took. And now I'm 25 episodes in. And what I find myself doing when I'm having a bad day is looking at a podcaster that I really love. I'll reference Rich Roll. I have like such reverence for what he's built. He's so thoughtful. He's so human. And on a bad day, I will find myself comparing myself to him. Gosh, I wish I could interview like that. Oh, I need to figure out how to like tell the story better, whatever it is. And then I find myself reminding myself, okay, girl, you've done 20 episodes. Rich Roll has done 1,000, over 1,000. And that brings me to this idea of execution versus taste. And I want to offer it to you because it's been incredibly humbling and grounding and reaffirming to me. I owe Jed Jenkins for introducing it to me, but it actually comes from Ira Glass, the like wonderful, renowned host of the show This American Life. He has been in like audio storytelling for a very long time. If you don't know, This American Life is a podcast that I believe he started in the 90s. So you're talking 30 years of building something, right? And I will link it in the show notes, but I remember I was at a writing retreat with Jedediah Jenkins, and he played this for us to write and talk about. And it's like this little pixelated old YouTube clip of Ira Glass talking about what he has come to understand about the gap between execution and taste for any creative, and you can be creative in infinite amount of ways, pursuing a new type of work. And I really recommend clicking it and watching it yourself. But what I'll say about it in my own words is that Ira Glass talks about, first of all, setting out to build this American life and having a very specific vision for it. He's like, I never had interest in talking to famous people. I always wanted to talk to ordinary people in the day to day and explore the depths of their experiences and the depths of their stories. He talks about it took much longer to build, but he built it over time. And he says, this is the part to pay attention to. He says, what I have come to learn about pursuing any creative work, going to build anything, is that when you start to do it, the gap between what you're executing and your taste is big. And I'll use the example for me. I am, finding my way in podcasting. My taste is the aforementioned Rich Roll, these like long 2-hour interviews, so well prepared. So he's so present. He's so used to it. He's a master of it. And then I interview, and I need to be super clear. This has nothing to do with my guests. It has everything to do with my perception of how I'm able to prepare, how I'm able to be present, how I'm able to explore with them, how I'm guiding it. So a lot of times, and I've gotten better at it, I'll perceive my execution as like, gosh, like, you're not there yet. You need to do better. And so that being my execution, where I'm like not quite satisfied, and I'm like, oh, I look back at areas where I wish I asked a follow-up question, like all this self-critique, which can be detrimental, but I think also is part of the natural process. So the gap between my taste being up here, Rich Roll land, and my execution is big. And Ira Glass says it well, when you're in a new category, whatever it is for you, writing, you're building a business, I don't know, your taste level goes up because you get to know the category, you're seeing all these comparative examples, and you feel this distance between what you want to be producing and what you actually are. Now, what Ira Glass says is really important. He says, I was 8 years into it, and I listened to what I was doing 8 years in, and I still was figuring it out. The gap between what I wanted to be doing and what I was actually doing was big. This is the point. The only way to close that gap is to keep doing it. And in moments where I have been beating myself up over, oh, I wish I showed up to that differently, yada, 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 I jump into like, God, I just want to get 30 more interviews under my belt. And the only way to close that gap is to keep going and get more reps. I was talking to my dear friend from acting the other night, and I've been taking scene study classes for the last 7 years, and some nights you go up and you crush it, and then some nights feel completely off. And I remember we were talking the other night, and it's like, but you know what? You went up and you got another rep. And so remembering this gap that is just human nature, like between what you believe is possible and maybe in your gut what you know is possible and what is actually coming out of you is felt. And for me, it can be humiliating, embarrassing, vulnerable. And this is what I've come to believe. When you are not pursuing the thing, when you are not in that dance of execution and taste and getting in the reps, you get to sit in the daydream about, oh, maybe I'll launch this podcast and it will like take off in 6 months and I'll be doing live events and all these things and all the things that I believe are possible. The humility is that it takes reps and it takes time. And it is the muscle to continue to show up and believe in it and iterate and evolve. It reminds me a little bit of like one of Brene Brown's big teachings in like the Dare to Lead era. And I looked up this quote. If you are not in the arena getting your ass kicked on occasion, I am not interested in or open to your feedback. There are a million cheap seats in the world today filled with people who will never be brave with their own lives, but will spend every ounce of energy they have hurling advice and judgment at those of us trying to dare greatly. Their only contributions are criticism, cynicism, and fear mongering. If you're criticizing from a place where you're not also putting yourself on the line, I'm not interested in your feedback. It's a good reminder. And dead, like full stop, I have been the person susceptible to criticizing. I think that's really important. Like watching on the sidelines, having opinions about other people that are in the arena. And that's just me projecting that I'm like not also in the arena. And now I'm in the arena in one area of my life, at least being this. And there are many areas of my life where I am in the cheap seats. I promise you that. And now and I feel the vulnerability of it. I feel the wanting to get it just right. And that actually feels like a clear segue to the other bucket of clarity that I want to explore with you and offer to you here. Because when you feel that gap between execution and taste, it can be really tempting to take shortcuts. In my conversation with Franziska Gonder, we touch on AI, and she really well articulates this idea of how necessary for our own fulfillment, for our own creativity, for our own clarity is the friction in the process. You know what's interesting? I mean, I'm sure you all feel this in whatever domain you work and live in. Like, is it just me that I swear, like 6 months ago, I was not aware of AI and how existential it feels in my everyday work and my everyday life. And I'll say for me, an inflection point was I had my dear friend Jory Craig on the podcast last month, and she's an expert in all things digital media and information as it relates to public opinion and politics. And she brought me into this kind of realm of really seeking to understand the threat of it and what it means for our just collective reality, I suppose you could say. And the optimistic takeaway that I got from our conversation is this idea that clarity leads to agency. She talks about that really well in our conversation. She's like, we need to turn our attention away from these algorithmic, addictive loops so that we can decide where we want to put it. In the days where I've existed in wanting to take a shortcut, wanting to expedite, I'm putting that in quotes, my process, my growth, these tools that are now all of a sudden just like present in our lives can feel like packaged as a shortcut to expedite things. And I hope that we can all work through the muck that we're in right now of understanding what they are helpful for versus outsourcing our own thinking. And what I have found in experimenting with them, like I'm a solo entrepreneur. I am not doing this all myself in the sense that I have just an incredible support system of advisors. Like major shout out to my dear friend, Natalie Tulloch, who has this incredible career in podcasting, and she has met with me on average 2 hours a week for the last year. And she reminds me that it's like a lot that I'm holding and I need to give myself grace. All that to say, it has been so tempting to like dive into it and have it help me think of guests and questions and summarize the transcript. And I think there's a long way to go to find the equilibrium, especially for any sort of creative work that is, where is it helpful to drive efficiency and where does it lose the plot? And then what is the true cost? And what I have found is I'm like such a perfectionist to a fault. And it's like I say in my interview with Franziska, like, it's like, oh, I can optimize and optimize and keep optimizing. And to what end? To what end? And I want to point to a few things that have helped me understand my experience. There's a documentary that came out called the AI Doc. I love that it's in theaters for whatever reason that it's in theaters. I think that it at least symbolizes to me that we're meant to have this conversation together. And I love, maybe that was the intention, and I think that's great. But I've been listening to one of the contributors to that doc, Tristan Harris. The thing that I want to pull from him that I loved how he spoke about is not just like these big collective questions of like, should 8 soon to be trillionaires that all have bunkers be deciding the fate of 8 billion people? And he says the same thing, like that foundational like belief that clarity leads to agency. And the hope and the intention of putting this documentary out there is that we're all having these conversations. And he says, quite frankly, like the road we are on right now, where there's this like race to market domination of, I think it's like 5 major consumer AI companies, is like an anti-human future. And it's not meant to be a doomsday piece of work. It's meant to be like, let's look at this cleanly. He talks really clearly about like the incentives of these CEOs, of these individuals in power, being market domination. And I remember he said something like, and that market domination ends up justifying the collateral damage. And so it absolutely is like this collective call to action. But I want to bring it to the lens of how I've been experiencing the trade-offs in my everyday life as an entrepreneur, as a woman trying to figure out this new chapter professionally, personally. And so the thing that Tristan gave me a clear lens on and gave me some clarity is Tristan defines AI and helps us understand what it is by using the idea of this digital brain, like this machine that is recognizing patterns and synthesizing information at a speed that our human brain could never possibly operate at. And so I think there is the question of like, how do we partner with it? Can we partner with it? And for me, it's, can I partner with it and figure out the application of it, that doesn't cost me the clarity in my human brain? There was an article that came out that was done by Harvard Business Review last month in February that I'll also link in the show notes. The headline is, AI doesn't reduce work, it intensifies it. And the thing I want to point to, and the question that I'm living inside, that quite simply I just would like to normalize for anyone listening, is like, I'm experiencing that intensification, and I'm starting to really consider the trade-offs right now. So I won't summarize the whole article, but it essentially explores research that they're conducting in companies with real employees. And they're saying that AI tools didn't reduce the amount of work, they consistently intensified it. They call it task expansion. It says workers increasingly stepped into responsibilities that previously belonged to others. Generative AI made those tasks feel newly accessible. It blurred boundaries between work and non-work. More multitasking. AI introduced a new rhythm in which workers manage several active threads at once. I'm smiling, which I shouldn't be, because I feel validated that even though I'm operating as a company of one, like all of that swirl is happening in me, in just me. What's interesting is the advice they offer to organizations to adopt is taking intentional pauses. It says, as tasks speed up and boundaries blur, workers could benefit from brief structured moments that regulate tempo, protected intervals to assess alignment, reconsider assumptions, or absorb information before moving forward. It talks about sequencing. Says, rather than reacting to every AI generated output as it appears, sequencing encourage work to advance in coherent phases. And then this is the thing I wanted to get to. The last piece of advice is human grounding. As AI enables more solo, self-contained work, organizations can benefit from protecting time and space for listening and human connection. So when I came across this article, Just want to see if there's one more thing I want to say at the bottom. At the end, the promise of generative AI lies not in what it can do for work, but in how thoughtfully it is integrated into the daily rhythm. Our findings suggest that without intention, AI makes it easier to do more, but harder to stop. The question facing organizations is not whether AI will change work, but whether they will actively shape that change or let it quietly shape them. To me, that connects to the theme of the broader media moment that this documentary and ethicists like Tristan Harris are talking about, Jory Craig are talking about. Like, are we going to let it shape us, or are we going to have an active role in shaping it? And everything that article just described articulates and mirrors back to me so truthfully and with so much resonance what I'm feeling in the show, in the team of one. And I've been thinking about these costs of like volume and efficiency at the cost of original thinking, clarity, the creative process, and not to mention like the existential threat of the energy that using that technology currently consumes. I was in a conversation with my acting teacher, John Markland, earlier this week, and we talked about some of these same questions that we're living through, certainly as people that lean towards the non-linear beauty of creative work. He said something that really stuck with me. He said, I don't desire for more volume, more reach, whatever you want to look at with those metrics of success. I desire to express my own voice in the world. I can feel like the emotion in my throat just saying that. I want to say it again. I desire to express my own voice in the world. I think what's making me emotional is how deeply I want that. And I don't want us to lose the value of our own voices. I am so susceptible, I have been, at wanting to say something in a smart, acceptable, impactful way. And oh, these tools are so tempting. But then I produce something with the tool and I'm like, that doesn't feel like me anymore. And for some reason right now it's connecting me back to the Brené Brown arena metaphor, to choose to be in the arena of protecting and believing in a future that continues to be human, and taking the risk of saying something in our own voice, in our own vulnerability, versus something that is safe and optimized, air quote again. I often say, I don't have the answers, but I'm more than willing to ask the questions. And this is an area where I wanted to talk about it here because there are big questions that I'm living through day to day. And I know I'm not the only person. And if I can be on the side of this paradigm shifting technological and societal moment that we're in, I will be on the side that believes in being human. And I think if I may indulge myself to share, the one thing that I'm really thinking about as I build this platform and these spaces are one way that's really this pressure to, in this, I guess I'm calling it this temptation to optimize, has created this interesting, like, what I accepted as status quo, I suppose, for building a podcast in present day is like, you have to farm out the clips and make them hooky and have them on every channel. And I'm not saying there isn't a benefit there to getting it out so that more people are aware of it. But I feel the little cost of taking a long form conversation that is rooted in personal storytelling and context and nuance, and like spark notesing it in little clips that are inserted in this increasingly overwhelming scroll. And what I find is a team of one right now is doing that, is fulfilling that weird precedent, taking my energy away from the depth that I ultimately want to create. And the reason maybe that brings me full circle to like lessons I've learned in the year since making my big career change, maybe I'll bring this home by saying, it's a romantic notion to think that some of these conditions we inherit are as simple as if you're in a corporate world or not. And what I've been humbled by is that that's not true, because a year later, I find myself adopting the hustle culture of this art form, this creative form, this professional form. And like the breakdown I really felt over this past week was this uphill sprint of trying to keep up with that, keep up with the clips and the weekly content. And I realized, back to that digital brain versus human brain, I was like, oh, my human brain will never keep up with this race. I will just be burnt out, exhausted, and like a shell of myself. And that's the opposite of what I want to do. And so a year later, I am now in the work again of looking at the assumptions I inherited about how this should be and the shape that it needs to take and what it means to grow and sustain and support myself. And I'm taking in an idea of what it, quote, should be. And I have to say, like, the gift of the conversations I'm having, they're mirroring these questions back to me quite frequently. And they're bringing me back to that check-in of like, but what do I actually want to create? And I get to imagine that for myself. And the lessons that keep being revealed to me in my conversations is not the wisdom of the intellect, but the wisdom of the rest of us, our emotional selves, our physical bodies. And I want to live my life and create my work with a reverence for all of that in myself, in the people I'm interacting with, who I'm building this with, and who I'm building it for. The last thing I'll offer on the AI front is a quote from this engineer that worked at Anthropic. He had his PhD and arrived in San Francisco to work on AI safety. He goes, "It's clear to me that the time has come to move on. I continuously find myself reckoning with our situation. The world is in peril, and not just from AI or bioweapons, but from a whole series of interconnected crises unfolding in this very moment. We appear to be approaching a threshold where our wisdom must grow in equal measure to our capacity to affect the world, lest we face the consequences. Moreover, throughout my time here, I've repeatedly seen how hard it is to truly let our values govern our actions." And so I might offer, yes, we have the considerations of our own life circumstances, but we all have space to look at where our values are impacting our actions. And so this moment in time, a year into this chapter, I feel reminded to check back in with my why, with what is true for me, to stay in the truth of being human, to keep exploring the muck of these questions. So, in the defense of the human brain, in the defense of a human future, I hope this work and this conversation normalizes where you are and what you're sitting with, and know that is a reminder, rather, that you're not alone in it. I think the biggest thing I'd like to leave you with is we're sitting in really hard, confusing, overwhelming times. And having these conversations with ourselves and with each other, I think, holds a much bigger weight than we can even give it credit for. So thank you for meeting me today. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. See you next time on The Truth Is.
I hope you leave this episode with something that stays with you, a question worth holding or an insight worth following. If this conversation resonated, subscribing or sharing the episode helps bring more people into the conversation. And connect with The Truth Is at The Truth Is Podcast on Instagram. Special thanks to the people who make this show possible. Editing by Dan Kroll. Video production and editing by Anton LaPlume. Music by Will Savino. Visual identity by Sarah Gaynor and Jonathan Bush. And guidance from my friend and advisor, Natalie Tulloch. I'm Kathryn Flashner. Thank you for listening to The Truth Is.